Welcome everybody to another week of Game Wisdom Live. This is for November 2nd, 2017. Joining me as always is video game producer Robert Leach.
Hello.
Hey Rob, how are you doing this week?
I am good, although suddenly I'm getting asked for passwords that I am having a. I just got bombarded with being asked for passwords. Hold on a second. All right, stupid Google. All right, I think I'm good. I just needed to see the chat window. All right, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. It's been one of those very interesting weeks. Of course, Halloween happened earlier. I know we were talking about on Discord with our very elaborate costumes we picked out for us to wear, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went as just game journalist Josh Bycer. What did you go as?
I had said before I was wearing a Hawaiian t-shirt and some colorful shoes, and I went as muted version of John Lasseter. That's what I claimed after I put it on. I really didn't have a plan. I just thought it sounded clever. So,
Hey, Olga, how are you doing? Oh boy, so Halloween was what we had a few kids. I'm at that point where I don't think kids show me any respect. I held up the ball. I said, everyone just take one, and the kid just like tried to see snuck a second thing out of the ball. I couldn't say anything. I can't chase the kid down for candy, but
yeah.
I'm now an old man. They don't treat me with respect anymore.
Rodney Dangerfield.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, so this has been one of those very interesting weeks. So first off, we actually hit for the first time our first $100 goal on patreon.com/glbbicer. We finally hit $100. So that means that for the month of November, I'm going to be asking people for games for the Games of Ill Repute analysis. So I made an announcement video about it. I believe it went up earlier today. But if you missed it, it's going to be a chance for me to take a look at a controversial game and see if there's anything worthy of studying, or was this just, controversy for the sake of controversy. So the three rules I mentioned, which Algora knows, one is no porn, obviously. Two is no hatred or postal, because it's been done. And three is it has to have gameplay. So no crazy visual novel games or stuff like that. So I put the spreadsheet link in the video. It's also up on Patreon as well. For this first round, anyone can submit any number of games. So anything that you think is controversial enough, put that in the spreadsheet, and you guys have until next Thursday, that's the 16th, and then I'll put it over on Patreon for the VIPs to vote on, and then I'll make a game, or I'll make a video. Otherwise, it's harder. I know it's very hard. I can't even think of any, other than, the big examples, like a BMX Triple X, or Hoonie Pop, or Hatred, of course. I can't think of any really interesting controversial games off the top of my head.
Well, you can go with the old school Leather Goddesses of Phobos, but it's a text adventure game, so it's not anything visual. Be hard to play. Interesting trivia. I actually worked as an intern for Running with Scissors of Postal fame.
Nice, very interesting there.
Yeah.
El Gore is suggesting Goddess. Oh, that would be an interesting one. He's been wanting me to play that game for a while. I think he wants to see me suffer. He suggested I play the Doki Doki Literature Club game on Halloween night. And it was just the two of us, I think, watching it. And just, basically, taking in the horror of that game over, a 2.5 hour period.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, the spreadsheet, it's open to everyone this first round, so feel free to go nuts. Other than those three stipulations, of course. Well, I don't want to get too many flags from YouTube. In some other interesting news this week, also for the Patreon, I've updated things with the new goals and rewards for November. So the new $100 goal I would love to do for for December, would be a Star Control 2 Let's Play. After my chat with Paul Ritchie and Fred 4, I would love to play that game again. I just can't dedicate any time outside of what I'm doing. So we stay at the $100. That will be our next goal. For $200, I figure we could try doing a multiplayer game night with the patrons, where we'll find a game we can all play and we'll stream that together, if we can hit that goal. And I'm going to get your thoughts on this, Rob, because I was watching a bigger YouTuber talk about what he does for his Patreon, and every Sunday he does a live chat on Discord with all the patrons, where we talk about what's going on, what we've been doing, stuff like that. Kind of just like a round table. I
Hmm.
was wondering, do you think that would be like an interesting thing for us to do on the Discord channel?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's pretty cool.
And basically keep it as a patrons only video. Like basically $5 that you participate, while $1 a month you can watch, like our discussion kind of thing.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting.
All right, I'll make another video. I'll ask the guys in Discord about it, maybe later tonight or tomorrow. See what everyone thinks, and maybe we can do something like that, like as like kind of like a Sunday afternoon chat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
All right. And then I guess the last little bit of news, I was telling Rob about this, but I've been approached by an indie developer for doing game design consulting work with them. And it kind of took me like completely out of the blue there. But I was talking to Rob about this before chat, and I think I'm going to see about taking him up on the offer and see about maybe actually getting work doing consulting like that.
Totally.
And if that goes through, I can certainly start advertising that as an additional service on GameWisdom.com. So I guess that's a win-win there.
Of course. Yeah. I wish you the best of luck. That should be a good fit.
Yep. I hope I can get the good luck there. We'll see what happens. So I think that's enough of the weird stuff out of the way. I guess we can talk about some of the games that have been coming out or we've been playing. So I just got a beta key for the game Tower 57. I believe that's what it's called. Let me double check that. This was a game that I think El Gore, I think you may have suggested this game when it was on Kickstarter a while ago. Yep, I was right. Tower 57. And this is a game that it looks to be a spiritual successor to the Chaos Engine by the Bitmap Brothers. Have you ever heard of that game, Rob?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's a good one. This was one of the. I think this is the first game to feature a co-op AI partner of all time. This was an isometric game. I believe it was like either the late '80s, early '90s, and it was released on various platforms. I believe GOG has the. Ooh, I don't even remember which version they have, but it is a long time game in terms of appeal. They made a sequel that didn't do so well, but the company Pixwork they decided to do Tower 57 as kind of a homage to that kind of style, or it's basically an homage to the Amiga games.
Oh yeah.
So I am under embargo, so I can't talk about it for at least. Let me pull this up because it's always important to get the legal stuff out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. I am under embargo until. And the excitement is November 13th. So I can't do anything more with it until then, but I'll certainly be making a video on it. I'm liking it, but there's one kind of a biggie issue that I'm noticing with the design, which I don't know if I can talk about until then, but let's just say it's one of those very strong negative feedback loops that can really cause a run to go sour. Elgar is talking about diesel punk. But definitely interested to see what people think about that. I also, tonight after our stream, I'm going to be doing an exclusive first look on Hand of Fate 2. This is a roguelike meets CCG. Very weird game. Like, you draw cards that determine what your encounters are, what rewards you get, stuff like that. So your deck is essentially built with good events and bad events, and you kind of decide what good and bad you want for that run.
Interesting.
And yeah, we liked the first game. I think that came like 2-3 years ago, and so the embargo is lifting in terms of video coverage tonight. I can literally play it for 1 hour on the stream, so I figure I might as well get into that. And then I'll play more of Dark Quest 2. This is a old school style like dungeon crawler roguelike. It kind of like features like a very 90s aesthetic to it in terms of like how the characters are drawn. It was a lot of fun to play. It's currently in early access. I think that's wrapping up on the 8th. So the plan is tonight to probably finish the rest of the early access content and then save the final level for afterwards. Let's see. I guess one thing of the other game I was playing, I guess, have you played any new games this week, Rob?
Nope, same old. I played some of the update for Planet Coaster, which was fun. And that's it. Torchlight 2. Again, I've been this week has been crazy, so I'm going to try to start getting into more stuff again. But yeah, not yet.
Hmm. Did you have a chance to look at that Hob game from Runic yet?
No, I do not have it. So I will. I will eventually. I'll watch your video and then I'll say I played it.
Because I'm curious what you think about, considering how much time you spent with Torchlight, and how this really is a big departure from the company.
Yeah, I mean, I've only seen little bits of it, and I was already like, oh, I don't, whatever. Maybe I'll like it. I don't know. That's kind of what my reaction was to it.
And I forgot to comment what Gore was saying about the podcast. Yeah, the Paul Ritchie Fred forecast that was a really great one. A lot of people enjoy that. And it looks like I finally hit over 1,000 followers on Twitter thanks to it.
Nice.
So we'll see how long I can stay there, but it is nice to hit at least another milestone this week.
Yeah, good job. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Let's see, any other games that I've been playing? Oh, I did upload this video for this roguelike called Slay the Spire earlier today that I'm really liking. It's a turn-based role-playing game or turn-based roguelike, but all your moves and abilities are, again, based on like a CCG deck. And you find new cards as you complete missions and fight enemies. There's relics that provide game-affecting bonuses to your character on that run. And from what I saw, there's 3 characters in the game at the moment, and each one has a completely unique deck that they make use of. And I am really liking it. I'm kind of surprised how much I was getting into. The first look almost went over an hour because I couldn't stop playing it.
That's pretty cool. What is the name of it again? I'm gonna get back to typing this stuff down.
Slay the Spire. Let's see. Elgor was mentioning, Dead Cells got another big update. That was that Metroidvania roguelike game that I looked at. Oh my goodness, it feels like years ago. But I've been ignoring it because I've been waiting for them to say it's done so I can just like rip it apart and play it. But we'll see. Also, I heard, do you know the game Space Pirates and Zombies?
Yes, yeah.
The sequel, I believe, is wrapping up next week. I did a first look at like week 1 of its early access, and I beat the game then. And I haven't looked at it since, but I heard that they've gone through and made multiple paths in terms of design. So I'm thinking about maybe doing another like full let's play of it now that it's going into 1.0 later. I think it's next week.
Very cool.
So definitely interested to look at that. Like all of a sudden, all these great games are starting to come out. I know I was talking to Josh in Discord. I know Call of Duty, isn't the new one coming out tonight or something?
That I don't know. I had to go back.
I love how the 2 guys who are supposed to know about the game industry, neither of us follow Call of Duty at all.
Oh no.
That is great. Let's see. Call of Duty World War II it is due out tonight at midnight. So there you go. Let me see. So we talked about Slay the Spire. Oh, I got another game from a developer. We talked about this in Discord the other day. He sent me the press release, and he says he's calling it the Joey of roguelikes from Friends. I'm like, okay, well, I think it's called I Am Encumbered, Call of Duty Recycled Warfare. Well, it's great that everyone here loves Call of Duty evenly, right, Rob?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me get.
I mean, certainly. I guess I'll watch it at some point in some kind of weird off esports channel. That's all I really. That's the interest I have in Call of Duty. I am not a first-person shooter kind of guy at all.
I've only tried Call of Duty during their multiplayer free weekends, and they've all ended disastrously for me, getting killed over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's just how it works. I'm convinced no one out there is good at it. It's just there's some kind of bot that just kills you when you go on. That's the whole gaming experience.
Exactly. So I found the game is called I Am Overburdened. It's a roguelike with the idea that you're wearing 20 different inventory items all at the same time that give you various powers.
That's
funny. I have not had a chance to look at it yet, but I'm going to try and get to it either tonight or tomorrow. For this week's podcast, I think this is the week that I'm. This is either the one before my talk with the platform Jump, or I think I told you about Jump, right, a while ago?
You must have.
That
You
is
must
the
have.
quote-unquote Netflix for games that we were
Oh
talking
yes,
about.
yes, you did tell me about that.
Yeah, so I had a chance to talk to one of the creators and their head of marketing, and it's very fascinating what they're trying to do with that kind of platform. And what they said that I thought was a really good sign, like I mentioned what Elgar said in a second, but they said that they envisioned Jump from the beginning not to be a competitor of Steam. And I thought that was a very interesting move. I think a very smart move for them. Because everyone else has tried to position themselves as the next Steam, and it's kind of blew up in their faces.
Yeah, it's just impossible. Like, all you. I mean, you have how many? Do you have over? You have over 1,000. How many hundreds of games do you have on Steam that will not port over to another store?
Yeah.
Like that's the big question. And then yeah, a service like this would be a nice like add-on. Like you can have your Steam and eat it too. Like I don't know what that was a stupid thing to say, but like I mean, you'd be able to play and stream games that you wouldn't be willing to buy and you wouldn't be able to install on your computer. So
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty nice.
Yeah. I know GOG does some cross compatibility with Steam, but I think it's only one way.
You can't win with
Yeah.
the volume. Can't win.
Mm-mm-mm. One second, I'm gonna double check my sound to make sure my level's about right. Let me do that. Yeah, I'll raise myself up just a little bit. It's kind of hard to tell like how loud I'm talking before it sounds like I'm just yelling at Rob here. But hopefully that should be good. Yeah, but as you were saying, Rob, it's always a challenge when it comes to these different stores because you can't, as you said, you can't compete with Steam anymore, or you can't compete directly with them. And like GOG is around just because they positioned themselves as classic games first. Huh, that's interesting. They released a version of Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth. I never played that game, but I heard very interesting things about it.
I have not played it either.
Mm-hmm. Oh, speaking about like horror and stuff, I was mentioning this in the Discord, but I kind of had like one of those Sophie's Choice moments on the Steam Halloween sale. Do I buy Five Nights at Freddy's or do I buy Resident Evil 4? It's the
Right.
internal debate there. I did end
It
up getting
is.
Resident Evil 4 though, because I own that for the GameCube, but I have not played that game in like 8 or 9 years. So that can certainly be a great belated, I guess, horror stream at some point.
For sure. I mean, you could do it like 6 months and have like spring Halloween, like they do with winter and summer or whatever they do.
Or they're now doing Christmas in July.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Speaking of which, I know that my radio stations are going to start playing Christmas music, I think now until December.
Pretty
One year,
much.
they start in like the first week of September, and it was like nightmare inducing because every radio station was playing Christmas as I was driving in for college. And that's all I heard for 3 months straight.
Jeez. Oh boy, yeah. It's just like they couldn't wait to get Halloween over, so they could just shove the stores full of decorations and stuff. So aggressive, so aggressive.
Mm-hmm. But I think with that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've played or anything else that ways to talk about. Yeah, so we'll do Half-Life 2 tonight, probably Dark Quest, I Am Overburdened. Can't do anything with Tower 57 until next week, unfortunately, but definitely curious to see what people think of that. So I guess we can talk about some of the interesting news that's been going on. And of course, our main chat for tonight will be our belated talk on horror, which we'll see how long that takes us there. But the first thing that I wanted to bring up, it came out of Activision, and that is what they're doing with. Elder used to work at a toy store. The Halloween songs that brainwashed. No, the Christmas songs, yeah. But the big news from Activision this week with what they're doing with the loot boxes for Call of Duty World War II. So if you haven't heard this, what they're doing now is you have a virtual lobby, kind of like what they do with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, where everyone's waiting for the next match. And you can summon supply drops, which are the game's version of loot boxes. And the very, I guess, infamous or interesting thing that they're doing is that the loot boxes are visible to everybody.
Oh
So when
boy.
someone's a loot box down, everyone around can see what that person gets.
Wow.
Now you can't interact with it, of course, but it's a very ingenious way of basically saying, look at me, look what I got, go spend more money in the store.
Sounds like it could backfire as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you see enough bad stuff come out, then you might not want to buy one.
Mm-hmm. My money is on them trying to tweak what you see, because I can just imagine if 10 or 20 people are all opening loot boxes at the same time, that's gotta start to slow down the server there. But they can probably manage it to say, oh, if this guy opens up and he gets an epic or higher, it will show more on screen. Kind of going what they were talking about with the what was it, the patent we talked about, I think last week or the week before,
Yeah.
with trying more effective ways of getting microtransactions going.
You know what this sounds like it might do? I might see a video of it or something, but it sounds like slot machines. A million people are rattling away and nothing really is coming of it, and then that one person, all this attention, all this sound, all this music, all this noise, because they just won a lot. So if they do something like that, where everybody you can open loot boxes and it's usually pretty pedestrian, but then that one person gets that really cool item, and the game focuses everybody's attention on it, that might be kind of a neat experience. In depending on what you think of it, it's certainly interesting.
Mm-hmm. Very similar to what I saw with Hearthstone, and how every time a
Oh,
friend or someone gets a legendary, you see the little pop up in chat about it.
I was just looking at El Gordo's comment. People abandoning matches after the opening of a loot box.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that. That would be very interesting. That would be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, now I don't know. Obviously, we are completely out of the loop with Call of Duty World War II, but are the loot boxes simply cosmetic, or are they actually game affecting perks in there as well?
Something I do not know.
Mm-hmm. Now I know even with it just being cosmetic, it's still a very sticky thing for them to do.
It is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to see if there's any other news about it. But yeah, I'm not seeing anything just yet. But it goes back to what we were saying with Battlefront 2 and having all their perks and progression tied to a loot box. Because it's just going to cause a very imbalanced experience like that. And as Ogor said, everyone's going to just immediately go open loot boxes and focus on that. And what happens when you're just not getting anything good? And I just wonder if there will be some kind of public stigma, this guy didn't get anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be pretty funny how that works.
Now here's something. Someone was talking about this on, I forget where, but there's definitely been that rise of YouTubers doing public unboxing videos, and I've never really enjoyed those. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've never liked it. It was, years ago when they started doing that, I thought it was interesting, but then it just seems to be when there's more and more and more of it. It was interesting at the time, but now, yeah, you're just opening a package and I'm watching you get stuff that I can't have. Or it's just an advertisement is what it comes down to. They're just advertising whatever. So yeah, I thought it was neat at once, and now it's just been too many years after that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we see entire channels dedicated to that kind of loot boxing with CS:GO, FIFA, and the like. And it's kind of become another way of these loot box design getting integrated into video game culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's video game culture is a weird place, as you well know, as everyone here well knows.
What is El Godo talking about? Destiny 2 now having YouTubers offering paid carrying through raids. Really? I gotta look that up here. My voice is starting to die on me too. Let me see this. Destiny 2 raid carry. Oh my goodness. There's actually a website for... Oh my god. There's a website now that's offering to... You pay them and they'll carry you through raids and trials in Destiny 2. Oh man. That's something else. And I thought it was bad enough with the gold farming too. Wow.
That's an interesting concept. Yeah. So it is. It's like just mercenary work.
Exactly. Oh man. Maybe I can do something like that with Cuphead.
Yeah.
I'll beat Cuphead for you for $20. Speaking of which, I did record another speed run of it. I'm now down 3 minutes below the current world record for 100% glitchless. So I'm
Nice.
getting there. I've
Yeah.
uploaded one of my plays to speedrun.com, and I'm waiting for them to give me the yay or the nay, which right now would still make me the number 2 speedrunner of Cuphead for that category. So
In the world, you have to
yeah,
always put that afterwards.
in the world exactly. Let me see.
It's mercenary work. You don't get to call it prostitution. El Gordo. I
I
have
look
to
away
attribute that
for
comment.
1 minute and El Gore is bringing up prostitution. Oh boy, that's great. We're gonna get flagged again. I can just feel it. But yeah, and like we saw that with gold farming for MMOs. Like, oh my goodness, the number of WoW gold farming sites. I remember PC Gamer did an expose on that. And this is kind of like goes back to what we were talking about with the worry of loot boxes and gambling. Is that whenever there is an opportunity to make money, you're going to find these less than reputable things coming in. We mentioned that with G2A, with their buying and selling or the gray market of game CDs, and this is one of those problems. Like, and we talked about this before with having some kind of a litigation or regulation, I should say, from governments or some official authority. And I don't think we can trust people not to do this kind of thing. What do you think?
Oh no, like you say, anytime that there's an ability to do something and make money off of it, someone will do it. It's not even. It's just that's how it is everywhere and for everything. So, yeah, it's really hard to prevent it. I don't think it's possible. I know after, you know, EverQuest, they certainly kind of clamped down on the ability to sell stuff like a
Mm-hmm.
character, and then they kind of opened it back up with in like in-game stores and stuff. So I feel like it's when the company hasn't made any money off of it and yet other people are, and then they figure out how to make money off of it, and then it's just fine all of a sudden. So um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's weird. If the game company can find out a way to make the money off of it as well, then they're going to be okay with it.
Mm-hmm. Wait. But they offer paid services to their patrons. Patrons, it's part of a Patreon tier. I'm not sure. What is Olgordo mentioning there? Is that about the Destiny 2 rates? Hmm. I'll let him see if he can elaborate that. But yeah, like you just said, Rob. Like whenever it's the same thing we were just saying with the Activision thing. Like if Activision does well with those loot boxes, someone else is going to do it, and
Yep,
then someone else. Oh, the carrying as part of a Patreon tier, huh? That is very crazy like that.
that's
So
interesting.
people are offering it as a Patreon goal or a Patreon reward. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. Like I said, I've never been a fan of things that take away from the experience of playing a video game. Whether it's by having to buy more resources, payable cheats, stuff like that.
Well, in this particular case, I can kind of see it in that these things require a giant group, generally speaking, to do a raid. So if you can increase your chances
Mm-hmm.
by hiring someone who knows what they're doing and someone who might have um, the kinds of weaponry and stuff to help you out, then sure. It's just like going and recruiting someone to join your guild. And I'm just thinking of like a World of Warcraft style stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just like going and recruiting somebody to help. It does look like you're milking your Patreons, but your patrons don't have to pay you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
Yeah.
It really is.
But it's again another one of those very weird issues that are coming up with more monetization happening in video games.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, every little penny is going to be taken at some point.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Getting back to the Call of Duty thing, though, like we've been, as we said, we've been seeing this more and more with trying to have these public displays of loot boxes and rewards like that, and again, it just seems all like very effective psychology to convince people, that you need to buy this, you need to spend more money, you need to roll the slot machine again.
Yeah, yeah, and that in itself, like you, as you know, is a addictive enough thing to put on somebody to force them to keep trying, because next time you'll get it.
But of course, the system is entirely rigged, of course, because it's all programmed by the developers.
Yeah, exactly. It's too easy to say, well, I've tried 20 times, I haven't gotten a rare item yet.
Now, here's a very interesting news piece that happened today that I think will probably be its own industry insight. But it's regarding the ESA backing the Republican tax reform plan. And it's caused a lot of developers to kind of yell back at them for doing so.
I'd have to read about that one. I really have no idea what that would even entail at this point.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, and I think this leads or goes back to that larger discussion we've had about there really isn't an official body that represents the game industry. We can say the IGDA or the ESA or so on, but there's always people who say, well, they don't represent me, or I'm not a member of them. Like, it's not like other industries where you have those centers of authority. Like with car manufacturing, you have, Ford, Honda, and I'm not a car guy, so I'm sure there's more examples, or, film with Hollywood. But with this, it's kind of like, who really represents the game industry?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's nobody, and I don't know if it's ever going to happen, quite honestly. Like in Hollywood, it is like it's the state. The state makes so much money off of it that there are unions for everything. There's the Screenwriters Guild, and there's the Directors Guild, and the cinematographer people get one, and the writers. And the actors, of course, SAG. So it's like all of these have been in place for decades and decades and decades, and of course they come from the necessity of needing to be represented and not ripped off by the production companies. So all of that stuff has been there for a long time. There's no real central point for games like there was for Hollywood. Now, certainly there's more areas where people are making movies, but like Hollywood is still the gold standard. But in games, it's everywhere. You can't really relegate that. IMDb, or not IMDb, I'm sorry, IGDA, they're not everywhere. Like, they have huge impact in some towns. In Portland, pretty big city, relatively speaking, it's pretty big. IGDA is nothing. It's Pig Squad. That's what's there. Yeah. So it's like, if you're an entity and you want to say you represent the games industry, well, you better be everywhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, like Algar's mentioned the ESRB. That's another example. The ESRB, for a time, was considered one of the biggest parts of the game industry, or biggest part in terms of regulation. But today, they really don't carry all that much weight because indie developers don't need to submit their games for ESRB ratings. I mean, you don't really need to have your game in a store like Walmart or GameStop these days in order to make a living. So and that was kind of the point of the ESRB, to be that stopgap or that stop measure between, the games and getting them into the stores. And I remember, I'm sure you probably have some stories as well at doing video game producing work, Rob, of companies being very adamant about their ratings and how important that rating was for the game.
Yeah, no, it's super important. I mean, it's just like in movies, if you get that R, then all of a sudden you lose this entire audience. But you get that PG-13, then that's gold. But I mean, that, and then on top of that, the rating systems, Metacritic, those impact game sales pretty heavily, and the way games are made.
Yeah, Metacritic has kind of become the new ESRB in that sense, in terms of how much publishers are taking it to heart. I mean, we've heard the horror stories of publishers saying that you will not get a bonus or you will not get paid your full rate if your game doesn't get at least an 80% on Metacritic.
Yeah, it's been going on that way for for at least 10 years, if not 15. It's and I never understood that. I never understood how that can happen. It's so random. It's not so random. I mean, you can pump enough money and generate enough excitement pardon me, that if you deliver some of what you're promising, then you're going to get a good score. Um, it's it is so hard to predict exactly where you're going to be. Like the difference between, like, in that case, what if you got a 79?
Yeah.
Is that not good enough? But I know for a consumer, no, it's not. You see the 8, you see the 7. It's very different things.
Yeah.
It is a crazy business, and whoever thought of that, I feel like, needs to be slapped.
Oh, and that's another thing I'll go mention about. Steam is now forbidding adult games to censor themselves on the store, but then give you the knowledge on like the forums or another link of how to uncensor those games.
So it's hot coffee,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Oh goodness, and the whole idea of adult games like that, I mean, that's another really big issue right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's its own industry, really. I mean, that's kind of how things go.
All those visual novel games on Steam. Oh.
Yeah.
I remember like a few months ago they did a Humble Bundle of all the Sakura games, or one of those very popular visual novel, I guess, fan service style games. I was like, I'm pretty sure if I buy this, I'm going to get a lot of comments from my friends if it shows up on Steam.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody can see what you have.
Mm-hmm. Same thing that happened when I played Duke Nukem Forever for the first time. And then when I did for the Dissecting Design, I just turned off. I went offline on Steam, like, nah, I'm not listening to my friends. No one needs to know I'm playing this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, most of the Steam visual novels are adult games. I'm sure there are many, many, many more adult-style games on there right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess another big, for a happier topic, I know Super Mario Odyssey came out this week, or I think maybe over the weekend, and so far it's been getting rave reviews.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I need to watch some videos on that. Did you play that, or am I thinking of someone else?
I don't have a Switch at the moment.
Then I might have been. There was a Twitch person playing it. I never got a chance to watch. I didn't get to stream or anything this last weekend. I feel so out of it. It's making me itchy.
Well, hopefully this weekend you'll be able to get back to it.
Yeah, I was thinking that I'm going to promise that at least one of the days I stream Saturday and Sunday, one of them I'm going to stream a new game. Hello, Kay.
Hey,
I'm going to stream a new game, and then I can have something to talk about. Not a brand new game, but a new game for me. Then I have something to talk about on Thursdays.
I'm pretty sure Mario Odyssey is Switch only, but now he's got me doubting. Let me check here. I know there's a there's Amiibos. Yeah, it's just for the Switch. I think my favorite new Amiibo is that everyone calls it the Pimp Bowser, where he's in a white tuxedo and top hat.
That's funny.
I mean, if you're going to have Bowser, a Pimp Bowser, I think, is right up there. Another thing I heard, I think this happened last week, but I've heard that the Lego Dimensions series is being halted. They're stopping production of it soon. So that is going to be the second Toys to Life big name that's going under. The first one being, of course, Disney Infinity. And that was very interesting. I need to probably bug Paul Ritchie, a few more times, but I want to talk to him about the whole Toys to Life market, because Toys for Bob is essentially the originator of that with Spyro Skylanders.
Right.
Yeah, so right now it just seems to be Skylanders and the Amiibos are kind of left standing. And that's very interesting, because I remember talking about this a year ago, that we were poised for this gigantic Toys to Life market war, and nothing happened.
Yeah, it's a weird. When I first saw that kind of stuff it was the Disney stuff that I first was really familiar with. It was hard for me to grasp in terms of how it could gain popularity, because it requires you to have two different things. You can have the one, sure, but it doesn't really help you unless you have the other. When you're playing these games with the toys, I mean, it requires you to have too many things to get started. I mean, certainly like a video game console, yeah, you have to have the game in the console, but once you have the console, I mean, the games are pretty easy, and you can whatever. I just didn't quite get it. Is my point? I'm rambling at this juncture in the show. I'm off today. I'm off.
When you get some more games in you, Rob, that's the cure right
Yeah,
there.
that's it. I gotta say.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people thought as well, that it felt like it would take too much to really get into that market. The same thing that happened with the music peripheral genre, the rock bands, guitar heroes, and the like.
Yeah.
That was like the last super big craze of the last decade, and then that kind of just fizzled out. But
Yeah, that certainly was a fad. Yeah.
mhm. It was an interesting fad, but there's only so much you can do with that, and that's kind of my thoughts with the Toys to Life. Like, it looks like the Skylander series is the most innovative in terms of what they're doing with the toys and their interactions, while the Amiibo certainly have it in the quality and simply just the brand marketing and nostalgia factor, I should say. And again, you guys can't see it behind me, but I got like 30, 40 different Amiibos all staring at me right now, ready to jump down and attack me if I say anything bad about Nintendo. Let's see. Yep, and that was a very interesting point what Gore just brought up, and it was something I've been thinking about. With the Metroid amiibos, they actually have exclusive modes tied to those amiibos, and I think that is the wrong way to go. I know we talked about this before, but I think the best case scenario would be offer DLC, and then the amiibos are basically a replacement for that DLC. So either I
Mhm.
spend the $2.99, $3.99, whatever the DLC, or I own the amiibo and I basically get that DLC for free.
Yeah.
Kind of try to give it multiple rewards or functionality rather than it just being either or.
Yeah, for sure. It is. It does suck to have to force someone to go out and get something. I mean, let's say you're playing the game later, and that thing is no longer made. How are you gonna access that content?
Oh yeah, and I remember again having to rush out to stores like at 8 o'clock in the morning to get amiibos during their height. So what if Nintendo decides, oh, we're going to take this amiibo that's not in print anymore, and we're going to give it like a special bonus, or stuff like that. And again, I know what people will say, that if it's just cosmetic, who cares? But it's still a carriage or hovering above the player's head like that, and you cannot doubt how attractive exclusive content or special content is to getting someone to ponying up more money.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're a games completionist and it's the Pokemon thing, you got to catch them all kind of thing.
Oh, that's a good one, Elgoro. We could do maybe one day a special video just walking around showing off all the amiibos, like a 3-minute exclusive video there. I'm sure all the patrons will love to see my obsession in full display there. Let me see. Anything else? Now, yes, here's a topic. Let me check our time here. Wow, 43 minutes already. But
Jeez.
there's also discussion that's been going on about politics in video games. There's a post on Gamma Sutra about a indie game that was being complained from the government or by a local government because they were basically calling out the oil industry or indirectly saying that oil piping or oil rigs are bad. And then there's of course a whole hoopla over Wolfenstein, the new Colossus, and they've been really playing against I guess the alternate right. Again, we don't want to get too political with this kind of discussion, but there's always been that talk about if games should be allowed to be political or not. I guess, what do you think about that in terms of like a general standpoint?
Yes. Yes is my
Mm-hmm.
answer. Like, why would you restrict
Mm-hmm.
games in that manner? I mean, I know everybody's got opinions and stuff. This is another channel to get your voice out, and a lot of people, they've got access to a computer and they can make games and whatever, but they can't necessarily go out and do reporting or what have you. But if this is your art form and you want to speak, then
Mm-hmm.
speak through your art form.
Yep.
Automatically, you don't have to play the game. Certainly, they got some awesome press, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot more people are going to be paying attention to their game. But yeah, there's no. Well, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't limit what a game creator can do. Yes.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with what Gordo said, that the developer wants to make their game political, they should be able to.
Yes.
Again, we've talked about freedom of speech, and that is certainly within their right to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if we don't want to get too political here on the cat, because that'll take us way off topic. But I guess let's get to our final topic, because this can easily be a good 30, 40 minutes for
Oh,
us.
yes.
And that is talking horror design. As you know, I did a critical thought, or one of many critical thoughts on horror earlier this week. But the horror genre has certainly had its ups and downs. And since I've talked about it a lot already, I'll turn things over to you first, Rob. So what do you think about horror genre, either survival horror, action horror, or whatever?
Well, my first thought is, how do you define it? Because certainly there are games who go set out and they put their foot in the ground, and it is, this is a horror game. But then there's other games that aren't necessarily thought of as horror and maybe weren't made with that intent, but they certainly can feel that way. So I mean, I went through my list of games and I was like, okay, which do I consider horror and which do I not, and which would have like horror themes but aren't horror. I think Spades, Pirates, and Zombies, for example, and Plants vs. Zombies. There's zombies in it, but it's not exactly a horror game. Then, of course, you got your pure horror, like Left 4 Dead. But the things that make me confused, because there's a lot of games that I feel like have a tense, feel about them. And you mentioned Amnesia in your podcast or your video. And I agree with what you were saying, is that Amnesia is kind of like yes, it's horror, but nothing can happen to you, really. So you just kind of run around and you might get a jump scare, but that's about it. But there are kind of walking simulators that I always have that feeling on, and I know that a walking simulator, I'm not going to die, but I have that tension. Like Gone Home, for example.
Yeah.
Don't want to spoil anything, but it really does. It feels like at any moment something's going to happen, and you keep feeling that throughout the whole game. So let me just say that BioShock, yes, I think that is a good another example of a game that wasn't necessarily meant to be horror. Certainly there are horror elements all over the place. I feel like Fallout has that scattered about, like Fallout 3 in particular. Scattered about, there's little horror areas. Now, questions I have, like other walking simulators, like I feel like I would even throw a Stanley Parable in there a little bit, because it really does. It plays with your brain in ways that a lot of other games had not ever done before. And I feel like that presents a lot of tools that are certainly being used in VR right now. My favorite being, you walk into a room and then you turn around, the door's gone. And then you turn back around and the whole room is different all of a sudden. Like I love that, messing with the player like that. Not necessarily horror, but it does have that atmosphere. And I went through all of them, like, well, I have action adventure games and action games and platformers and roguelikes, and a lot of roguelikes just seem to have a feel to them. I mean, you're alone. It's just like Doom. You're alone and there's monsters all over the place. Is that horror? Is it not? I don't know. And like, what do you call Terraria or Minecraft, that has a lot of horror elements but is really just a building game? It's so like I don't know where it stops, or starts for that matter. But I'd say like Gods Will Be Watching. Is that a horror game? Is it just a tense drama? But I guess that's my initial reaction, is what is a horror game? How do you define it?
Yeah, and as both you and Olga are saying, there are a lot of games out there that have elements of horror, but can we really consider them a horror game? Like, I'll give you an example. Like in the original Stalker, Shadows of Chernobyl, there are plenty of sections where you are underground in some bunker and there's very little music, and you're wandering around waiting for someone to get at you in the dark. But then there are cases where you are, running in a base with soldiers chasing after you, and you're in an intense shootout. So is that a horror game? Does it just have horror elements? BioShock being another case. I forget his name, but that one section in BioShock 1 when you're dealing with like this crazy guy and you're in his like little I guess boutique area. I mean, that's certainly a very freaky experience. But then of course, 20 minutes later you're, throwing fireballs and getting into gun battles with big daddies. And
well, the intro of the Big Daddy has a very horror element to it.
Definitely. And there's always that very interesting part. And as Algora says, like the atmosphere is definitely a major part of it. But oh, thank you, Ford Frolic, Sandy or Sandra Cohen. That's what I was thinking of. And Algora just made another really good point: the survival sim genre. Games like The Long Dark, for instance, where you're trying to survive in the wilderness and not freeze to death. As you said with Terraria or Minecraft, like there's a lot of games that feature elements of horror, but are they really considered horror games? Like, there's a very big difference between these games and something like Resident Evil or Alone in the Dark or even something like Dead Space.
Devil May Cry, you could count that in there, I would say. I know that when I was thinking of, oh God, why can't I remember it all of a sudden? Don't Starve, that's the one.
Mm-hmm.
That's like 90% horror elements, like everything's creepy looking,
like
and
a Tim Burton-esque movie right there, or
yeah,
Tim
but it's
style.
It's got that. It does have that quirky style, and it seems like a little bit of a sense of humor to it, so it's a little harder to take seriously. Maniac Mansion was one I brought up that is horror comedy. I mean, I know it's very much comedy, but it has a horror theme to it.
Yeah. Or even something like speaking about horror comedy, there's of course like when Evil Dead 3 came out, and how it just felt completely different tone compared to the first two. It had horror elements to it, but there was a lot of comedy in that movie. So do you call it a horror movie? Do you call it a comedy? Do you call it somewhere in between?
Yeah. Let me look at some of the other. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good question. Because changing a little mechanic like that, does that suddenly make it a horror game? Or does it just the environment? Yeah. That's a good question to ask, I guess.
Yeah. Or even something like Dark Souls. There's a lot of people who find Dark Souls very tense, very nerve-wracking, but it's not really horror. Like, the feeling of tension can be certainly applied to horror, but it doesn't have like that same kind of touch. Like, I never feel like I'm going to be jumping out of my chair scared playing a Dark Souls game. I'm nervous, but it's a different kind of nervousness.
Yeah, I agree. The one that I really liked, and I have to remind myself, that's why I wrote all this down. That's great. Lone Survivor was one of those that I felt was really a solid horror game because you never knew what was going to come, and the light you had was very minimal. So there was plenty of areas where you could do a jump scare, but it wasn't quite a jump scare. Like your guy was going crazy, and you kind of felt that, and these weird creatures walking around. So yeah, stuff like that, it can be very effective. I just don't know, like you say, how does that become, what makes it horror specifically?
Yeah, and talking about gameplay, that's another major part, because we've seen very different philosophies when it comes to gameplay and horror titles. It kind of led to that whole split between survival horror and action horror. And there are some developers who are just completely opposed to any kind of combat or weapons in their games, such as Frictional, who does Amnesia, whoever does Outlast, and the like. So I guess a question for you, Rob: what kind of gameplay do you think there is a set kind of gameplay for horror to work, or is it variable?
I think it's variable. I really do, because as you had mentioned in your video, like it's that control factor, the power factor, that as soon as you give a gamer a shotgun, then all it takes is some skill, and they'll just take it all down. Left 4 Dead, however, brings a lot of elements into it. Like you do have weapons, you do have this, but it's all very limited, and you have to work as a team. And let's just see, walking sim horror games where you can't do other than run it. I mean, I can understand that. I am not that way because I enjoy the tension that it brings. Calling it a game is the big question in that particular area. I do like them, but it is like nothing happens. You're not really doing anything. You're not in danger, but it does present tension in a way. But it's not a game per se.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said, like the Five Nights at Freddy's series, that just puts me to sleep when I try to play those games. Like, it just doesn't do anything for me. Like, there has to be some way for me to get involved in the world, I think, for that to work. And I think going back to what Laura was saying regarding like Bioshock and making the second game more horror-like, and as you just said, Rob, like there's a difference in how weapons are presented to the player, and that overall affects the tone. Like we mentioned, like the Doom guy in Doom 2016, when he picks up that shotgun, it is a power fantasy moment right there. You are not supposed to be scared. But we see many horror movies that go with that angle where the person's, nervously wielding their gun and trying to figure out where the guy is. So,
Yeah.
like, how things are presented and how, what are the utilizations of these options, I think is a major part, whether it is or isn't horror.
Yeah, and I think El Gordo, your point of reducing that, limiting that particular element, does give you that additional tension. Like, yeah, you can't heal very much, so you better damn well be careful with how you use it. And it does present tension because there are great things that can happen to you if you don't use it correctly. Let's see, gripe with the trend of walking horror sims is considered the only. Yeah, I agree with that. As we were saying, I think that I do not agree with that. There's any specific type of horror game. I was going to bring up the example as a puzzle game called. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. Where did I write it? It's on there. I played it. It's one of those few games that can play a Puzzle Agent. It's it's kind of funny, but it's got a horror element to it, and it's a weird story. But it's a puzzle game.
Yeah.
Portal, in a weird kind of way. I mean, in terms of the game, it's not necessarily horror, but you're this person, you're trapped. You're going through this gauntlet, this labyrinthine gauntlet with this crazed robot harassing you the whole time. So, I mean, in a way, that's a horror game, but that's action and it's puzzle. So there's a lot of things you can do. Adam Zombie Smasher has some horror elements. It's I like that game, and it does have that story, and it does feel like there's some real tension going on. God damn, that game was hard to me. I couldn't get past a lot of it. Binding of Isaac, I think that's a great horror game. I think they really did a good job there, and it's just it's top-down action. So yeah, I'm just rambling on and on about this stuff, but I agree with El Gordo there.
Yeah,
I was going to say Thief. Say Thief.
Yeah, and
El Gordo mentioned Thief. That's for anyone who's not seeing the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing about things from a gameplay point of view is what kind of options are you giving the player in order to deal or not deal with these threats. I think that's one of the things that's really annoying about a lot of modern walking sim horror games, that you have nothing you can really do with it.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, like, how do you balance it? Because for survival horror games of like the last 2 decades, many of them balance it by making the game explicitly frustrating to play. The infamous tank controls of Resident Evil and the like. I guess here's a question for you and for the folks in chat: are bad controls or limiting the player, is that an essential part of horror? Like, do you think we could have a horror game with like the tight and fluid controls of something like Doom or Devil May Cry or something like that?
Well, I wouldn't call Devil May Cry's controls all that smooth, but
or at least Devil May Cry 3, or the later ones.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's room for both. I don't see any. If you have a really creative developer who has a great vision as to what they want, I think you can do whatever you want and make the game scary or horrific in whatever way you want. It's like, if you have smooth controls, that's great, but you have that limiting option of health and limited ammo and that kind of thing. So Mirror's Edge is kind of a horror game. You're constantly running, and you have very few weapons to deal with, but it is a very skillful game you have to do. That kind of thing. I really do. A good designer can do whatever they want, but they're so few and far between. A good and creative designer that doesn't have the burden of a AAA studio to work with, I guess.
Yeah. And like something like Thief, as we were talking about, that's a really interesting case of how the mechanics lend themselves towards horror without really explicitly being horror. You are powerful in your own way, but you're not a fighter. You can't get into direct confrontation with a lot of guys.
Yeah.
You are sneaking around, you're hiding in the dark. But it's a difference in terms of how that's represented. Like, in a lot of horror games like Clock Tower or Haunting Ground, you're hiding because you have no means of anything. But in a game like Thief, or even something like Batman Arkham Asylum, you're hiding as in a position of power. You're going to
Yeah.
drop down, or you're the instigator in this
Yeah.
case.
I'm a big fan of games that have a horror element that are very mental. Like not mental as in you have to think a lot, but mental as in they're eating away at your head a little bit. Sanitarium was one of my favorites way back in the day. It's so far back in the day I can barely remember it, and I have to replay it now. But that kind of stuff I really like. I like the head games part of horror, and the more you can implement that in a game,
Mm-hmm.
the better. And I know that's why I brought up Fallout, because they do a lot there in some very specific areas. They'll do play with that. Most of the game though is not like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or is in the details exactly.
And as Laura says, there are ways of limiting the player without intentionally making the game difficult. We brought up having limited healing or limited ammo. Like if you're, and I think that's a good example. Like something like in Doom, you are flooded with shotgun ammo. But imagine playing a first-person shooter where you only have maybe 10 rounds for an entire level. Then what do you do? Or something like Metro. Metro, was it 2033 or one of those Metro games where your bullets are also currency. So you can't just
Yeah.
go around shooting everything at will.
Yeah, Will always has it rough. That was terrible. What about Diablo? Like, what do you think about like Diablo in that sense? I mean, you basically are a complete badass when you're walking around, but it's got a horror theme. You're
the
supposed to
whole
fight the devil.
the whole gothic horror angle.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very tricky in terms of how the aesthetics factor into play. Because a lot of people felt that Diablo 3 kind of betrayed the series. Because they made it more cartoony, there's a lot more brighter colors to it compared to the first two. And it's always very tricky like that when you start trying to do very different things with aesthetics and design. Like there are games that go, and I know we've talked about this one before, but the games that kind of become they're using the counter example to be that example. Something like, a game that uses overly cute characters, but is, M-rated, violent, and disturbing. Like what we did with Doki Doki Literature Club. And I'm sure there are many more examples I'm forgetting of games that are playing on your expectations but going in a completely different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I enjoy a good game that does that. One of the other examples, like I thought of a couple of platformers. One is Capsized, because again, it just sticks you in the middle of nowhere. Your character has no idea what's going on or where he is. And then Risk of Rain, I put in there. Again, it's just you. It's the environment is it's you versus the environment, not necessarily you. You are, if you're a good player, you can do pretty well, but like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a particular monster that's affecting you. It's the whole world. So, and I think that is a good horror strategy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Silent Hill Downpour.
Yeah, that's one of the few Silent Hill games I did not play. But yeah, like the Silent Hill series was another really good example of like that psychological horror and the fact that you don't know what's going on. But getting back to the point about gameplay, I think there's always that line between it being you're limited enough to make it terrifying before you go over and becomes frustrating and then you don't want to play it. Like when you're trying to play a game like Siren, for instance, on the PlayStation 2, and you're dealing with these very cumbersome controls and enemies can just like chase you down and kill you, it's more annoying to play that game than you're trying to feel terrified.
Yeah, I can see that. When you're talking about restricting controls, what brought to my mind, and this is not a horror game, and I have to remember the name now. Bushido Blade.
Mm-hmm.
Because the controls are fine, and then you get your leg hurt, and suddenly you can't do anything. I feel like restricting the control over time could be a huge tool to use, and I'm sure you can come up with a few titles that I would like you tell me so I can look them up, of games that do that, examples that do that.
You mean games that like hurt you or wound the player in a way that weakens them?
Yeah, I guess Fallout's an example there. Now that I think about it, but in time is making the controls hard under specific circumstances.
Well, I know in the Evil Within, when you use like the health kits that permanently waste your health, it also makes you dizzy for like a few seconds, so everything starts shifting around, and it's something
Yeah.
you're not supposed to use when you're in direct combat for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and Laura mentioned, of course, like in the Evil Within, when you're step into a trap, or in the beginning when you're hurt, and now you're forced to limp around. But you also have to be really careful of, it becoming like a cliche or a
Yeah.
trope of, oh, it's time for a horror section. You just so happen to get cut and now you lost your gun. Or all of a sudden your weapon gets taken away from you, now you have to hide.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's hard to not lean on some of that stuff when you're trying to make a large game. Oh gosh, if people would just set out, and I like you had mentioned with Amnesia, and yes, El Gordo, it is definitely a walking simulator. Um, when you set out to make a horror game, you really have to ask yourself all these questions. And I don't, like I said, I don't mind the walking simulation horror games, but that's a niche audience. If you want to sell a lot of copies, well, you better pull out some stops.
Yeah. And like with the horror genre itself, like again, we've seen a lot of games kind of copy each other like that. And like we've talked about this before, but I'm kind of curious about what's going to happen with Resident Evil going forward. Because 7 was such a big departure for the series, but it sounds like it was a critical success, but not a commercial one.
I honestly don't know about the latest Resident Evils. It's been, is that on Steam? Can I buy that there? I actually
I'm
don't know.
pretty sure you can.
Awesome. And my wife loves Resident Evil series.
And so here's a very interesting thing. So there's a post in May about Capcom wanting Resident Evil 7 to hit 10 million sales. And then as of October 18th, it only has hit 4 million units shipped. So
It's not the success they wanted.
mhm. I did not like Machine for Pigs. Laura was talking about the Amnesia pseudo sequel there.
Yeah, I played them both.
Hmm.
Um, it was interesting. It was interesting. But again, like you say, there were a couple of parts where you feel like you could die, but really at the same time, I look back at them like, well, I probably could have just walked and been fine.
Hmm. Yeah. And yeah, going back to the discussion of atmosphere for a second, that's again one of those very interesting things because we have seen, like, as we've already talked about, there are many games that pull from horror for their atmosphere. Like when we were playing Dark Quest 2 the other night, you are in a gothic castle and dungeons with skeletons on the walls and dead people on the ground, but it's not supposed to be scary. I still need to play that Never Ending Nightmare. I don't think I've
No,
gotten around to it yet.
it is good. The art style is amazing. Yeah, Elgor's we talked about this last week. I think Neverending Nightmares is just a great visual. If nothing else, it's a great visual adventure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, let's see. I think we're over an hour. We can probably start to wrap things up in the next few minutes. But I guess another question, like, I guess here's a good one. Did you ever play Alan Wake, Rob?
No, I didn't.
Because that's a very interesting game because it has horror elements to it, but it leans very heavily on third-person shooting. So again, it's one of those games where you're supposed to be scared, but when you're walking around with like all the grenades and shotguns and your best lighting source, it's very hard for that game to scare someone.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, it is. That is the difficult thing, isn't it?
mm-hmm. And we mentioned Left 4 Dead, but there's also a lot of discussion about the tonal differences between Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. Left 4 Dead 1's cutscene, or the intro, makes it appear to be a horror movie, while Left 4 Dead 2 feels more like an action movie.
Yeah, again, it's that fine line
Mm-hmm.
because you really do. You get that skill factor, and it is about shooting. It's really like Doom. You're shooting zombies and just surviving, but at the same time, it's all about skill.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much about it is the power. You have the power. They look like they do, but really, it's just a regular old video game.
Mm-hmm.
The one I wanted to bring up real quick is VR. That's going to bring it to a whole new level. That's for sure.
Yep. VR is something that'll be interesting along those lines. I've seen lots of YouTubers like show off VR horror games.
Yeah.
But I think it's still too soon to say even if VR will still be around in that capacity, because I heard a few more developers are pulling out of VR for their companies.
Yeah, it looks to be like it was going to be a tough business, and a lot of money went into it. Uh, Alan Wake and Dead Space were two games that were different from the tropes at the moment when they were released. Oh, very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, Dead Space wasn't that bad either. Yeah.
Both are kind of black sheeps on their genre. Yeah, I'm gonna have to, honestly, I'll have to play them both. I have Dark Space. I haven't even played it. Yep. I probably have Alan Wake too. I have no idea. God,
it's somewhere there, right?
You've probably played a way higher percentage of your games than I have, and yet you have way more. But yeah, I would actually like to play some VR horror. I know it's not going to be the hugest thing for a while. I know they're going to probably go. I think VR is going to be like one of those weird technologies that never took off big time. But some of those horror games, like with Stanley Parable, when you turn around and look at something and it's gone, that in terms of a horror game, oh my God, that would screw with people. I think, especially in VR. I know they do it in VR. There's a particular game that I cannot remember the name of it. Surprising.
Or like another great example like that tonal consistency would be something like the Killing Floor series. It's you and 4 friends up against monsters coming out of the woodwork, but there's death metal playing and you have shotguns and rocket launchers and all that. Now, here's another interesting question for you, Rob. Like, talking about like unique takes on horror, what do you think about multiplayer horror games where one person is the killer or the villain? Because we've seen 2 big examples of this past year with Dead by Daylight and Friday the 13th.
So I had not. Interesting. Resident Evil 7 has VR compatibility. Okay, that's cool. But in terms of what you just said, multiplayer, I think that there's a very big call for that. I know in board games, one of the very popular things has always been the whole werewolf mechanic, which is one person is the bad guy. You don't know who it is. And over the course of the game, this Battlestar Galactica uses this, Lord of the Rings uses this, a little bit. And then, what is the one I'm thinking of that uses this as well? I just got one that uses this. But like, really, you don't know who the fiend is, the foe, until much later in the game. And that kind of stuff, asymmetrical multiplayer horror, and this is the kind of thing that it makes the game kind of fun, because one of you is the bad guy and nobody wants to tell. If you're the bad guy, you want to be the best bad guy possible. So adding that into games, I think, is brilliant. It is a great multiplayer horror spin. Now, if you're all like Left 4 Dead, acting against the same horror entity in the same fashion, even though it is a little asymmetrical, but it's not. You still all have the same exact thing. Oh God, was it the ship? Is that what I'm thinking of? Where everybody kind of has a different path they're trying to take, and it's like a whodunit.
Yeah.
Whodunits if you make it horror, you can really make it good. So yeah, there's some neat mechanics that can be used along those lines, I think, for multiplayer.
Yeah, I'm surprised we don't see more of those types of games, but they're also very tricky to balance, because it's that classic example of, do you want to be a survivor or do you want to be Jason Voorhees? Like, how many people want to be a survivor and not... Like, you have to be very tricky with that, especially when you're trying to make both modes appealing.
Yeah, and that's where the balance comes in. In the board games, and certainly in Werewolf, the biggest problem I ever had with that game is that the game can last a while and people are eliminated one by one. So you're basically sitting there watching everybody else most of the time. But you do, like Battlestar Galactica, you have this really great balance of someone's a Cylon and the other people are waiting to see who the Cylon is. And it can change. That number can grow over time. But yeah, to balance that out and make it really make that team want to work together against whatever this other element is, and you don't know who's on your team and not. I think that's a unique experience.
Hmm. Like a really good example from a movie would be like
Uh,
John Carpenter's The Thing, of course.
oh yeah, yeah, for sure, definitely. El Gordo's points, having a serial killer among the players, and now you got
Hmm.
boy, the movie coming out, the famous Poirot, Agatha Christie book.
Uh,
The oh god, what is it
Murder on the
called?
Orient Express.
Yeah, Orient Express. That same kind of thing. Yeah, it goes from detective to horror, and it's not a huge leap.
Yeah. Again, it's all based on what the atmosphere and what how things are being presented to the player
Yeah.
or the audience. So I guess with that, I know we are over an hour. I think we can start to wrap things up. I guess for you, Rob, what are some of like your favorite examples from the horror genre?
Well, let's go back to my little list over here because I really did. My favorite examples, again, I know I shouldn't throw this in there necessarily. I will throw in the Stanley Parable. Why not? Why not? Because hey, this is my question here. Okay, I think Lone Survivor was one I really liked, just because it was so effective. Sanitarium, as we had spoken about earlier. I will throw Gods Will Be Watching out there, even though I haven't played the whole thing. That was mentally draining. Um, and let's see, I liked Risk of Rain. I'm not going to put in any of the roguelikes or games like Diablo and such. But yeah, I think those are the ones. If you can go back into text-based as well, some of those are very effective because it's just text and you can envision whatever you want to envision. But yeah, those are some of my favorites. I'll throw in Maniac Mansion just because. Why not? But yeah.
I like,
How
of
about you?
course, like the Resident Evil,
Yeah.
Silent Hill. I did enjoy Alan Wake and Dead Space for the time for what they did for horror. Laura mentioned Sanitarium, the old school adventure. I thought that was a really interesting take on that surreal or psychological horror.
Yeah.
Lone Survivor being another really good one. Yeah, I think those are it. Like for me, it has to have like I need to feel like I'm kind of trying to fight the game or I'm in control and it's like trying to get around it. Like I've
Hmm.
said, the whole walking simulator or very hands off style just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I can totally understand that 100%. I mean, Stanley Parable has multiple endings. Did you know that? Of course.
Mm.
But yeah, no, I agree there, and I do like the tension, and I do also El Goro like the Amnesia
Hmm.
Pigs one. I already forget the name. Where is it?
Machine for
Machine
pigs.
for Pigs. Yeah, I do like that one when I played it certainly. But yeah, there's just something about the walking simulators that, as far as an experience goes, yes. As far as the game goes, no.
Hmm. And I guess one last point, I also really enjoy what they did with Alien Isolation and how they modeled the xenomorph to kind of track the player. Because I think that's another big point we haven't touched on, is that I think one of the problems with a lot of horror games is that it becomes very routine. You know this window is always going to break. You know, if you walk into this room, someone's going to attack you from above. So I
Yeah,
would love to see more games go for like these procedural, I guess, horror elements to them.
yeah, definitely. And Alien's a great one because that
Hmm.
was a sci-fi horror mishmash
Hmm. All right.
as a movie anyway.
All right. I think with that, we can probably start to wrap things up. Again, we can certainly switch to any number of topics, but I know it's getting a little bit late here. So, I guess for this week, we'll wrap things up. Again, we can certainly come back to horror time after time. If you're watching this record, again, the Patreon updates will be going or have gone up. I'll make a separate video. Be sure to suggest games for the games of ill repute. I'll ask the people on Discord what they think about doing kind of like a Sunday private chat for patrons only, and if it works, I'll start advertising that as well as another feature. But with that said, for those of you watching this now, be sure to come back in a few minutes for my exclusive look at Hand of Fate 2. Again, we only have 1 hour to play of, and then we'll probably finish Dark Quest 2 for the evening. But if you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hang out with us on our private Discord channel, again, patreon.com/GWBicer. All you need is to donate $1 a month to get in. But otherwise, again, be sure to check out Rob doing his live streaming on the weekends. You'd like to mention your channel?
Sure, it's Indie Voyage Rob. I also play on /RNG Gods _ TV. That's a group that I'm streaming with on occasion. But yeah, 2 p.m. Pacific time, Saturday and Sunday. That is my target these days.
All right. So I think with that, we'll wrap things up for this week. Again, be sure to tune in next Thursday around 9:30 EST. We'll be back again. I'm sure we'll have more games to talk about. But other than that, I'll be back on later tonight for my regular stream. Check out Rob during the weekend. And otherwise, have a great evening, and we will catch you all next time. Or I just want to mention what Curtis said, we need Josh loot boxes.
Yeah, throw that in there.
Exactly. And they have to be opened up in public, too. You have to stream yourself opening it, or it doesn't count. All right. So with that, have a great night, folks, and I'll see you all later this evening.